Hello and welcome to our closing keynote for the LMF Life Skills Summit. My name is Sonya Barlow. I am somewhat the founder and the CEO of this amazing idea that has changed my life and so many lives before us. We started in 2018 as a brunch club, 2020 as a business, and today we are honestly trying to build the careers and confidence of women in the workspace by having really honest, transparent discussions around careers, community, and confidence building. I'm super excited of what we've achieved so far, but also a little bit afraid of what's to come, given that there's a cost of living, that D&I budgets are being cut, and yet women are still doing the work they need to progress in the workspace. This closing keynote is extra special for me because I have Vanessa on the discussion with me. And I think just for backstory and context, I first came across Vanessa just over 10 years ago now. No, just about 10 years ago. And WeAreTheCity was one of the first, if not the first, senior professional women's network that I ever came across in my life. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. There's actually women that not only want to help each other, but are progressing in their careers. They're not just wearing heels and suits. They're like walking up in their trainers and they're absolutely smashing it. And they're not taking no for an answer. And in 2017, I was a rising star, which was amazing. But at the same time, in my own workplace, things were quite complicated and my own confidence levels were, I would say, deterring, just because you're navigating a space that isn't necessarily created for you. And so when I created LMF Network, it wasn't meant to be anything that it is, but I always had Vanessa at the back of my mind to think, okay, what would she do? And how can we start these conversations? And what do people want from a brunch event? And then what do they want from an event itself? And now what do they want from a network? So I think for me, it's quite an humbling experience to have Vanessa here with me. And I'm going to kind of launch into Q&A and invite everyone watching, following, sharing, just to get involved as well. We have had so many great guests on this week alone. We've had people from Kenya, from Bali, from Malaysia, from Singapore, from Pakistan, from India, from Philippines, from London, from the UK, from Australia, just joining, chatting, sharing, listening, learning, and making sure that we are leveraging these conversations, because the core aspect of everything we're doing is building community, building networks, and just making sure that we're building ourselves. So Vanessa, before I launch into Q&A, I'd love it if you could give a brief introduction for those people who may not know what you're doing, and then we'll kick off.
So first of all, before I do that, obviously you guys have spent 4 days and Sonya's built this, right? She's built this whole platform because she's passionate about giving back to other women. So as much as she will humble it down, but I just want to say a big thank you to her, because she's built the LMF platform from scratch, from a brunch to the network. She's always out there hustling. She's wrote the book and everything like that. So Sonya, before I kind of go into me, thank you for continuing the work and to be part of the world that we live in, that just wants to see a better workplace and a fairer workplace for women. So kudos to Sonya, she's incredible, and her team. So now I'll just give you a little bit of intro about me. So I spent 25 years in corporate. I worked for 9 different financial organizations. I left school at 16. I grew up in a fairly economically challenged area of London, where they told you more what you wouldn't achieve rather than what you would achieve. I just think it was the nature of kind of the school that I went to and things like that. But I had big dreams, you know. I wanted to go and change the story for my family. There was just me and my mum. No sob story of, again, where I came from or just being part of that one parent family, because I wouldn't go back and change a thing, because it's kind of made me who I am. And also growing up in that area, seeing people accept everyone's differences, whether it was their religious beliefs, whether it was their race, whether, you know, it was their economic circumstances, everyone worked harmoniously together and we all supported each other. And I think that is a really important grounding, because that's probably driven a lot of my work, like further on down the line. So at 16, I went up to the City of London. I could see it from my bedroom window, the tower block that I lived in, and I could see one tall building. And some of you may have heard me tell this story before, but it was that of NatWest Tower. And I knew that was a bank, and I knew that's where money was made. And I knew that if I could just get a job in that City of London, that I could change things for me and my mum, because obviously 2 incomes were better than 1, and she was running like 5 jobs. So I went up to Liverpool Street in my kind of cheap suit. I remember even I had a briefcase. When I think back now, I think, oh my God, bless her. But I felt the part, you know. And I went into every single, what we see as restaurants and kind of, you know, bars now. They were real banks with real people. And you'd fill out an application form and you'd hand it in, and you'd actually hear in about 3 days. So things were better then. But for me, it was always a no. And it was a no for a number of reasons. I mean, firstly, I think I got about 6 GCSEs. You know, my top grades were maths, not quite sure I got that one, and that was a C, and dance. I think they were the top grades. Ironically, my career in technology, the grade was an F, which ended up kind of being what I did for a living. So please don't let your grades dictate if any youngsters are watching. But finally, one of the banks decided that they would take some kids that didn't necessarily have the background that they would normally intake. And one of them was me. And I got to go and work in the very building that I could see from my bedroom window. I got to work at NatWest. And there's a long old story as to how that went horribly wrong. Basically, calling out the behaviour of someone that was very, very senior to me probably was a much more diplomatic and tactful way of doing it. But needless to say, you know, my career was never going to flourish there. And NatWest is a much different place, and I love working with them now. But, you know, at 16, and bear in mind we're talking a good 30 years ago, if not more, you know, it was never going to happen. But subsequently that, I went into a tech company. I won't tell you the whole story because it's too long, but working as a receptionist, I was watching one of the other ladies that worked in the training department. I used to offer to help her. I've always been kind of an individual that will put my hand up regardless of the job, regardless of where I rank in an organisation. If we need to get something done, we're going to do it. And I shadowed her, and when she got a head count, she hired me, and I watched her for 2 years and see how she'd done her job and felt confident enough to go and do her job elsewhere. So I left, ended up running a training program. The trainer went sick. I stood in and went, I can teach Windows 3.1. This is how long ago it was. Taught myself basically to be a trainer. Ended up finishing that program off, had a few applications I could teach, taught myself another 15, set up my own company when I was about 21. Looking back now, I had no business acumen. I don't even know why I did it, but I managed to do it for a year until I got a tax bill. I was like, oh, what's the tax man? What does he want with my money? So definitely not grown up to run a business, and I couldn't scale it or anything like that, but realized I was too young to do that, to run back to corporate. And again, it's too long a story to tell given the time we've got, but basically jumped through a lot of jobs, punching above my weight. I think I'm long enough in the tooth now to admit that I worked for jobs that I wasn't really qualified for, but I just had a good talk. And I knew that I would study during the evening, you know, to kind of get my head down. And some of the jobs I got through them by the skin of my teeth. And I got bored a lot in jobs, and I now know the reason why. But kind of I jumped jobs every 2 years. That was my strategy, to earn more money, to not kind of become part of the fabric of an organisation until I hit my 30s. And then I started to stay slightly longer in jobs, and because I was getting more senior at that kind of point. And then when I did get to a very senior point, it was that particular point, I got a big job over at one of the banks. And I remember walking through the door and going, I don't actually want to be here. And there was a couple of other things that were happening in that organisation at the time. It wasn't the organisation it is today, which is a much nicer place. But I just thought, you know what? I just started WeAreTheCity, and that was out of my own frustration that I wanted to meet other women. I'd always been in male-dominated tech banking environments. There was nothing out there. All the women's networks that were there, they felt quite elitist to me, coming from my background. They cost money that I didn't have in order to join. When I went there, I didn't really feel that I fitted in. They served a community that all looked like each other and had similar backgrounds. And I just said to my husband, if only there was a network for me, someone that was for every single woman. So whether or not you're working in retail, but you aspire to work in corporate, regardless of your background, somewhere where they could go, that's not going to cost them anything, but would signpost them off to other people that were doing other things. So bear in mind, that was 2008, right? Nobody was talking about gender. Gender was on no one's agenda. This is a financial crisis. We were lucky if we had plants in the office. It was kind of that at that particular point. And gender was, you know, diversity wasn't even a term, but we set up this little website and we put it out there. And at the end of the first week, 10 people joined, and we were like, oh my God, we've gone viral. And it was my mum, Stuart's dad, and it was a cousin and stuff like that. But that's where it began, this very empty website that was supposed to help women. So that's kind of where it started. I'm hoping I'm not losing you there. The StreamYard went a bit funny. So that's where it began. And it was when I got this big job in banking that had been around for a couple of years. And I thought, you know something? When I do anything to do with WeAreTheCity, when I do anything that's helping women to learn from my own experiences, to see how they could progress, that's when my heart sings. So I decided to give up my job, which was a big thing for everything the girl ever wanted at 16, to finally get there and go, actually, it's not what I want anymore, and focus on women. So everything went, the car, the health insurance, and I sat there thinking, oh my goodness, what have I done? But roll on kind of 11 years later, I know what I've done and I know why I did it. So, you know, We Are the City now, I think collectively with We Are Tech Women, it's about 100,000 women with a strong social media presence. I think we've done something like 130, 40 different events, probably more physical ones, and then hunting online. My award winners, which are very special to me, Sonya is one of them, my rising stars, 950 of them in our 10th year. So look out for those nominations open in January. My Tech Women 100, there's 650 of them, and we're just about to announce a shortlist, and then another 100. Then I've got my Trailblazers. These are people pushing the envelope for gender equality, lobbyists, changing campaigns. I've got my up and coming Pioneer 20, which are incredible refugee women. So that's what makes my heart sing. So running We Are the City, running the events, trying to upskill as many women as we can, but also using We Are the City as a platform to publish what everyone else is doing. So if Sonya's doing something, we will shout about it. If someone else, another organisation, is doing something like Code First Girls, you know, we're going to promote that as well. So I'd like to think of us as a mothership for everybody, so that even if you've got two women in a room that says, let's set up a network for, I don't know, women in gardening, or we would be there to back them up. So that's kind of where we are. There's loads of other pies that I've got my fingers in, but that's the bulk of it.
I love that. One thing that comes to mind, well, two things actually. The first thing is that you really took risks and you were continuously curious. And we had a panel on curiosity because I think that's a fundamental skill that we need to encourage women, and especially young girls, when they're entering the workspace. How do you instill that level of curiosity with your own daughters and or the women that you've taken on board your mothership and that you're, you know, fundamentally mothering through your network?
So I think, I mean, I've always been curious. I don't ever believe that there's no answer to a problem. I think that makes me gloriously stubborn in a good way. So I think that's one of the things around curiosity and just this thirst for learning. And again, I know you've had a panel on it, but for me, it's constantly stretching myself as well. I don't believe we're ever done. Right. So I'm probably a lot older than a lot of the people watching. So I'm 50 now, and I learn every single day, but I have to put the effort in to learn, because sometimes life gets busy and things get in the way, especially when I say, as you mentioned, I've got two children, and even though they're both in their 20s now, you know, they're both at uni or just finishing uni, finishing their masters. They still need their parents, right? So there's lots of different things going on. So I have to carve out time to allow myself to be curious, and to allow myself to learn, and to go to places, and also to have an element, which I think is really important from a leadership perspective, to always be self-aware. As I say, when my kind of motto is no one's done. You know, there are things that happen in society, you know, that I may have my own stereotype beliefs. I've got my own biases, despite the world that I live in and the work that I do. And I have to consistently educate myself, you know, around what is the lived experience of these individuals? How do I help them, but in a way that isn't kind of perceived as savior in any way? Do you know what I mean? But how do I use that network to do things for individuals? So that curiosity is in me, but I have to find time to be curious because of how big life gets.
And I think that's a really good starting point to how do you therefore avoid that level of burnout, especially when your brain is changing and maintaining and evolving. And the reason I bring that up is because, you know, we know and we talk about it online, when you become neurodivergent or when you realize that you are that particular leader, everything else makes sense in your life, but then the future doesn't quite make sense. So I know that you speak openly about your ADHD. I'm recently going through that diagnosis and, you know, constantly having to face people dismissing you and or not believing you because you're too high achieving for you to have this symptom, but actually it hurts your brain. But then I guess the other point there is then you get a little bit of FOMO and you get a bit like, oh, well, I can do that and I can do that and I can do that. And actually I've got all these great ideas. You've started this network 15 years ago. You've navigated it through, like you said, a recession, family, balancing act. You've made it into what it is now. But how do you look after yourself as a leader and as someone who is also evolving as you do?
I mean, I was diagnosed with ADHD. I always knew there was something. My ability to focus on something and go down a rabbit hole and just not let it go and then make something. People used to say, how many hours do you have in the day? Do you not sleep? And I used to joke and just say, I'm just very productive, but I would equally get periods of complete inactivity where I'd be looking at something knowing damn well I needed to do it. That deadline is burning or that thing needs picking up. And I would just walk past it.
Like an invoice.
Nor that deadline till literally the last possible minute. So I think it's hard. And I mean, I've kind of got to an age now where I'm kind of completely honest and transparent. I've nearly burnt out so many times, Sonya. I can't tell you. I think I'm on the bridge of burnout every single day. Right. So as you said earlier on, navigating things like COVID, when we switched everything to virtual, didn't know if I'd have the money to pay my staff. I certainly weren't letting them go. Luckily, the clients came with me. I mean, even to this year's been a challenge, right? As you said, budgets have been cut. We do awards that cost thousands and thousands of pounds. So, I'd love not to charge for those events. We try to keep it much lower than anyone else does, but it's still hard for people to afford that stuff. So it's tough. So every day is another challenge. So in terms of kind of self-care, I think I know myself well enough to know when I'm really teetering on the edge of a burnout. And I tend to then take myself away from the situation. So I'm lucky enough to have a very understanding husband that knows. And I had one of these probably about 4 or 5 months ago where I just came in one Friday. Everything felt like it was piling up on me. I had a few sponsors that couldn't sponsor things. I was like, how am I going to afford to do the things that we need to do? There was all sorts of issues going on. And I just walked through the door and I said, I just need to get away. I just need space to think. And I literally booked a cheap flight on EasyJet. And I went away for a couple of days on my own, which I've always done. And I just went away and I just sat and I just thought. I took off social media and I let my priorities kind of come to the top. So I know when I'm going to kind of go, but I box as well. That's another thing. I get great pleasure doing a bit of gardening. Now I'm a little bit older, my dogs, I live my joyous moments through my kids as well. And I think also with the nature of our work and the way that our year is structured with Rising Stars, every time I get to a point where I'm like, oh my God, things are getting really hard. And, I'm having to design conferences. I'm having to sell the conferences. And I've got a brilliant team of 8 people. But I just get to a point where I'm like, oh my God, this feels really, really difficult. And then we'll have a Rising Stars. And then I see all those women get up on that stage and I know what it means to them. And I talk to them afterwards and I'm lifted again and I'm ready to go again. So every time, even towards the end of the year, there's a running joke. No one talks to Vanessa in December because I'm literally floored by December, having that year. And then we have tech women and stuff like that. And I'm kind of lifted again. But, it's hard in the people that run networks and in the women's space. We rely heavily on the support of corporates. We have our wonderful champion networks that open up doors for us when we're not in the room, which is fabulous. But sometimes it does feel like really hard work to do the stuff that we do. And sometimes it feels a little bit thankless in places. And we're trying to do stuff and we know it's good and we can't fund it and stuff like that. So it does get tiring. And it's times like that it would be like me, Sonya, a couple of other network leaders. We can talk in a safe space and go, this is really hard this year.
Super hard, right? But going on that network element, going on your mentors, going on your role models, how did you extend yourself to actually creating that network? So what I mean by that is, I think I had a network when I first started, and then somewhere down the line, I stopped asking for help. And it was very easy to try and figure things out yourself. And now I'm back online to be like, hey, actually, I need help. Going back to role models, going back to mentors, going back to informal types of support networks that you're like, you know what, we're not doing great. We've done really well. We've had success. Now things are stagnant. Now, how do you get to that next level? And also, how do we help each other? Because at the same time, I think there's a lot of networks popping up that are trying to do similar things. I'm like, but why not come together and be collective?
So I think that with the network, I mean, when I first started out, I hated networking, Sonya. Even if I had to go to a corporate event, when I was in banking, I used to walk in, my own imposter syndrome was there. I didn't have the educational background of people in the room, probably didn't know what cutlery to use if we sat down for dinner. There was all these different things and my own demons, right, that were kind of in my head. And I did my first networking event. I walked in and I walked back out, and I often talk about that until some lady said, "Oh, can I stand with you? I'm on my own." I thought, God, this is nuts. This is all it took. And I really worked hard at building my network in the very beginning. Once I kind of got comfortable with it, I went to the opening of an envelope. And I think, you know, it's safe to say I helped a lot of people. As I went, I was kind of creating a Rolodex in my head of all these people. So if I met someone 6 events down the line, they were like, "Oh, I really need someone to help me to do that." I was like, "Okay, you need to talk to that person." So I probably spent a good few years, when I look back at it now, connecting other people and making magic happen, of which was for no benefit for me other than this kind of inner sense of warmth that you get when you get 2 people together and they make some magic. But what happened as a consequence of that is those people then paid it forward and paid it back to me. So they would be going to events. So, for example, there was a period where, even just before lockdown, like with elderly parents being ill, like my in-laws and stuff like that, where I couldn't be in London as much as I wanted to be. But there were people out there that would meet people and go, "Oh, you need to talk to Vanessa." And then the next thing I would get an email. So probably, it's still to this day, I probably get 10 to 15 emails a week where people are out on the road and they're introducing me back to people. So I don't have to work as hard at it anymore. And it's great because my network is probably of a certain age demographic, you know, that what I call the old school, that were there kind of 10, 15 years ago, that, you know, have either dipped out of corporate themselves, or, you know, they're running their own networks, or they're doing their own thing. But those are minds of experience that still want to help your generation and the other generations that follow it. And you mentioned about other networks. We know of 1,000 different networks across the UK, right? There's a directory on WeAreTheCity. We're updating it at the moment. So if you know of any, make sure that we haven't missed anyone, that we keep that directory there, because everyone wants a different thing from a network. You might be in a different demographic, might be in a different industry. But I think it's really important, like, that you help each other. So we will promote things. So technically you could say that me and Sonya are a little bit competitors in a certain way, but I wouldn't bat an eyelid to help Sonya, and vice versa with me. So we very much have that mindset of everyone has a part to play in the progression of women in the workplace and the progression of women in society. We should be helping each other, not tearing each other down. And that goes for women in the workplace as well. And it's funny because we've got a big tech summit that happens in December, which is middle level tech leaders, men and women. And one of the things we talked about last year was male allyship. And this year we're just changed it to just allyship, because a lot of the focus groups that were coming up were saying, actually, the men want to help us. Sometimes they don't know what good looks like, but they want to help us. But actually, our issue is with the women.
Absolutely.
Right. So I don't want that elephant in the room. And also, I want to grow a next generation of leaders, of women that would absolutely reach down and put the ladder down for the next woman and not pull it up. That's the culture, and that's down to us to build. So I think collaboration is key. I think helping other people. Everyone wants to protect their revenue streams, of course, but sharing is how we get there. Let's not forget what we came here to do, which is help the women. So, and again, Sonya, we need the corporates to help us to do some of the work that we do.
And we need corporates to understand how important the change is, the work that's being done. And also, it's not about staying in your lane, but it really is about how do you make sure that you're defining who you're helping, and then how are you getting them into the pipeline and saying, hey, actually, maybe you start with LMF Network and then you go to the WeAreTheCity, because we don't deal with senior stakeholders.
But you know, I think, you know, we talk a lot about having a singular career, and now it's a portfolio career. I've got a little side hustle on the side. I've got the day job and stuff like that. Have a portfolio of networks, because there may be stuff that we can give you that might interest you for a period of time. And then you've got LMF that are over there, and then maybe you need a bit of an industry network. So I don't think you should be married to anybody, right? You want to be able to take the good bits of everybody to help you in your career. And, you know, we don't do a mentoring program, right? So whereas Sonya does. So if someone comes to us and says, like, we do a program of sorts within corporates, but it's not a mentoring program. But, you know, if you want that, I'm going to say, go and talk to Sonya, or go and talk to one of the other people. So, but one of the things I do want to say, Sonya, for anyone watching, you guys are the advocates for our businesses. So think about that when you're in your networks. Have you heard of LMF? Or maybe you want to go to WeAreTheCity. I mean, all the stuff on our website is completely free and stuff. There's no kind of paywalls or anything. Maybe WeAreTheCity can help you. Or actually, why don't you try this network? So we need you to kind of advocate for us, which helps us to do the work that we want to do, which will in turn help you. So I'd like to think that LMF have an army of followers, like we have an army within We Are the City, and some of them intertwine, Sonya, don't they? Like some of your network and my award winners and stuff like that.
Akua is here, right? She intertwines. We've got Marsha who intertwines.
Absolutely.
And I think a big part of it is exactly that. It's we're helping for a very similar cause, but from different angles, because we need support in different angles. And when it comes to mentorship, I'm actually really grateful you've said that, because one thing that we've come to this point is, what do we focus on and what do we move forward? Because the problem lies is there's so much support that's still necessary. You kind of want to support everyone, and you can support everyone, but you can't do everything, because then actually the idea is that you burn out quicker and you don't have an area of expertise.
So good. We're all in. If you think of it as a huge collective,
absolutely,
each one of us plays a fundamental part in that. So even if there was something that anybody watching might need, well, I might not be able to give it to you. It may not be in Sonia's repertoire of products or services or whatever, but between us, we know where you need to go. And then that feeds another women's organisation.
But what you've also touched on is the confidence to ask for help.
100%.
Right? And especially when you're women in corporate, we don't always have that confidence to ask for help. If anything, it seems like, if we're going to ask for help. So we had a really good panel on failure this morning. And at the end of it, we were like, why have we spent 90 minutes talking about failure? Do men have panels on failure? Do men have panels on how to ask for help? It's like, why is it that this seems to be a women's issue? But it seems like it is, like ask for help, advocating failure, figuring out our successes. So if you don't have the confidence to ask for help, to find those mentors, to get involved with networks, what are some easy tips and tricks that you would recommend?
I'm just going to touch on the failure point, right? I've made multiple mistakes over the 15 years. I still make them to this day. Where to err is human, right? So, but I think to accept that failure is part of your growth journey, that's it, and that we'll all learn from it. It's how you recover from that failure, for me, is the biggest learning point. It's not what's happened, it's how you come back from it and the resilience that you show to carry on. But I think, in terms of, what you were saying around, how do you how do you come back from that failure, but how do you ask for help? I used to think many years ago, and I write about this in my book, which is very old now, called Hills of Steel. But I used to think that asking for help, why would I want to do that? Because I've got a fancy job title. That's what they've employed me for. That's what they pay me for every day. Surely I shouldn't be asking for help because that shows I'm no good at my job. But actually, I wish I'd have asked for help more. It's not a sign of failure to ask for help. We're not born, goes back to my point earlier on, none of us are done, right? We don't, you're not born knowing everything and stuff like that. And do you know what's the worst thing that can happen? If you ask for help and someone says no, okay, do you know anyone who might be able to help me? I think it's your continuous thirst for curiosity to get to the answer, that you need. And the more you network, the bigger that pool becomes of people that can help you. So I think we've got to ask for help. I remember being a young mum, right, trying to do this fancy job, fly around the world at the time, on the mask of it. Oh God, she's Superwoman. She can do it all. I was in pieces behind the scenes. I talk about being able to check my bags in, like, to airports, but not my guilt from leaving my kids. It was a constant battle to keep up that facade. And I wish so much, that I'd have just put my hands up and gone, I need a little bit of help here. And weren't too wrapped up with my own perception of what that would look like exteriorly. Exteriorly, is that a word? From the exterior? Yeah.
I don't know. I think I make up words as well. I think it's an ADHD thing, actually. So I make up words.
Like going on.
I'm on radio. I make up words, and then I stop and I look at my producer. I'm like, "Is that a word?" She's like, "No." I'm like, "But what is the right word?" Or like mantras, I can never remember them. I think it's something that's common. But what you've also touched on? You've touched on trends. So far we've touched on the level of failure, finding networks, really just being our best selves, understanding what success means, going out and figuring out what work looks like. But as you've mentioned, the work sphere has changed so dramatically, right? Even in the last 3 years, 5 years. I mean, 3 years ago, forget 3 years, at the beginning of 2020, if someone said you could have 100% remote working role, I would be like, could you though? Like, is it really 100% all the way to you don't really need to commute to work? We're going to be online a lot more. We're going to be building social connections through social media, all the way to actually you can work from anywhere in the world. And it's great that careers are changing. It's great that the future of the workplace is changing. So what are some future trends that you see that we as young professional women or as senior professional women, as professional women who are just ready to really disrupt the market should be working on?
Well, first of all, I mean, it's an interesting time, right? Because a lot of companies are making the mistake, in my opinion, of demanding people back to the office. I get people need to be back in the office. I do agree there should be a balance, because also we need to be there to bring that next generation on. They're learning, their careers are starting in their bedrooms or in their parents' houses. And that is a concern. They don't have the basis of connectivity and experience that we had when we started work. So there is an element of that, but also there's this element of demanding everyone back. So I would think from trends, I mean, we see it, right? It's there in black and white. I hear it from my own daughters. We don't want to work in offices where we have to do 9 to 5, where we're there constantly, where you're hired for a particular role and not necessarily for the experience or what you could be within that organization. So I think be very, very careful who you work for and where you go, and their track record and stuff like that. And also, we know, Sonya, that people go somewhere, they don't like it, they just jump. There's none of this, oh, you have to stay for 2 years because it looks good on your CV. I think, that landscape has changed. So I think I would advise, be careful who you work for. I think also the proof is in the pudding. If you're not getting support from an organisation within the first 6 to 12 months of that role, they're not going to support you. I know that's a bit of a bold statement, but unless you see some traction of career development and stuff, and I'm talking about kind of when you're more mid-role, you have to start questioning what's the longevity look like in terms of that support. I would encourage every single one of you to have a side hustle, 100%. And that plays back to Sonya's book, right? And I tell you for why. When COVID happened, like one source of income, a lot of for people that was cut. Right. So I know in my family, my husband lost his job, contracting job like that. I didn't know where my salary was coming from because it all needed to be on WeAreTheCity. I set up my own little side hustle. I had a little artificial flower business going on that, which I absolutely loved. I taught myself. I did a diploma online at 5 o'clock in the morning, but having that second source of income actually gave me a bit of confidence that actually if I needed to make money, I can, regardless. And I don't care how it is. If I need to put food on the table, I'd do it. But I think having that little backup plan, that just in case the corporate goes wrong, even if it's you've bought the website domain, you've got a social media handle that you've kind of just got and mothballed or whatever, even if you start building a little mini network on the side that might play to that, should that become the day job. I think all of those things are really important. I think don't think linear job, career, one company, that's going to be it. It's got to be, actually, if I ever had to fall back, then I've got something in my back pocket that I could build that I've already got a mini infrastructure for. So I think that's a really, really important point. And I see more of that as a trend. Sonya, when I talk to people now, they're always like, oh yeah, and on the side, I do this. And I love that. Because back in the day, there was no on the side. If you were on the side you weren't paying attention to your job. And your
2019, one of the reasons why I was departed from my workplace is because I had a side hustle that clearly didn't add the skills and values. And I was like, that doesn't make sense. If I'm disciplined enough, and this is for everyone, if you are disciplined enough to manage something on the side, you are building skills in your own time, you're then taking them into the workplace. Your workplaces are basically it's entrepreneurial, but also the workplaces are getting free skills that they are building, that they're not investing in.
Sonya, on that point, it makes for a happier employee. I know, like my boss used to let me do WeAreTheCity, right? When I first started it off, before it was what it is today. And he used to know, like I used to leave and go onto panels or events that we were doing. And I was a much more happier employee because I had his support and I was able to go and do that. I didn't have to pretend or anything like that. I probably did more pretending that I was going to a kids' sports day than I ever had to pretend that I was doing a side hustle in that organisation. Do you know what I mean? Which is nuts when you think about it. But, it's just, again, working for employers that let you do your thing outside of work and let you be you and know that you pitch up a much better person in the workplace because you've got a passion that you're allowed to explore.
And if I tell you some stats, right, 3 in 4 of us have a side hustle. 75% of Gen Zs want to align with a corporate that align with their social and political and kind of inclusion values. If you have a mentor, you're 5 times more likely to be promoted. If you focus on your soft and professional skills, you're more likely to earn 5K a year. So the stats are just there. And actually, if we invest in our people, they are 18 months on average more likely to stay in your business. So actually, it's not only as a cost saving exercise, but you're helping your people grow, build, encouraging them to be their best selves. And happiness and productivity comes back into the workplace, and it's going to help your business thrive. And I always find it really weird how we're still in 2023 having a conversation around failure, gender, side hustles, confidence, imposter syndrome.
Sonya, as well, though, I do think we're paying a bit of a price for a generation. I talk about a lot of the ladies that are kind of my age group. Unfortunately, we still have within our organisations a certain generation of line managers that remember how things used to be, right? So presenteeism was king. You'd be at your desk, and stuff like that. I remember I used to fly in from the red eye from New York. I'd shower at Heathrow. I'd be at my desk. There was no going home at 2 or 3 o'clock because I was a bit of jet lag. I was there for a full day, despite everything. And that's the way it was. But you still have this middle layer of managers who are probably my age, maybe a bit, and I'm not going to generalize for all of them, that still are in this old school mindset. And they don't get that people would have passions outside of work. They don't get that people could work at home and they're not in the park, or they're not out for lunch with their mates, So it's a cultural thing. It's a big ship to move to make people want to trust people. Like I do my staff, we have a rule, right? So all of my ladies have all got kids. They all work flexible hours and stuff like that. I don't care. As long as the work gets done, I don't care when they do it.
It's task-based, not time-based. We're the same, right? We're a remote-first team. You get your work done. You do it from wherever you want. Like today, after this, I'm going to lock off because my mom and sister are here and we're going to go out. I run the business, but if I need to show my team that this is how you live and this is how you work as a leader, and then they'll be more confident, not only showing up for you, but saying, actually, if our leader can do that, or our manager can do that, or our colleague can do it, then we can do it too. And it builds trust and credibility.
And that's the thing. I think that's the issue that we have. It's about trust. And some people will take a little bit longer to come round to the new way that, in terms of what different generations want from a workplace and what that support looks like. And the companies that get it will be the companies that win the war for talent. The companies that don't are the ones who will be scratching around and go to the back of the pile in terms of innovation and bringing in that wonderful fresh talent that we've got out there. So
this is literally probably... That's the bit I'm probably going to click for socials and put everywhere, actually. Tag everyone. My final question to you, Vanessa, is what's the mantra that you've always come back to when times are a little bit tough or noisy or difficult, you're lacking the confidence, or you know what, your brain is just overloading and you're like, I need just to take a break?
So it's always been my one. I've had it for years, and it's called "A Life Without Passions is a Dull One Indeed." And that is basically what I come back to, because if I'm getting stressed or things get really, really heavy, I think about the things I'm passionate about. And that's where I have to find the time to find that passion. So I think that's what's really, really important to me. That's the kind of mantra that I live with. A life without passion is a dull one indeed. So,
I love it. I also loved how it just rolled off your tongue. Well, Vanessa, thank you so much. I'm super grateful that we had the conversation, and actually, hopefully next year this will be in person. So for everyone watching, sponsors, allies, please drop us a line. For everyone that's joined us so far, I just want to say a big thank you for joining us. I appreciate that. I actually had very little to do this. So a big thank you to my colleague Alejandra, who is currently on a flight somewhere going to her best friend's wedding of some kind. And she has not only organized it, but she's encouraged us to do it again. Earlier, a few months ago, I was like, I don't want to do it. I don't know if it's going to be successful. And she's like, just do it. Just go for it. Do it. People want to have the conversations. They want to have these topics. So thank you so much. Vanessa, thank you so much for your time. And for everyone else who's joined us, I mean, this is just the beginning, right? We do what you want us to do, which is great. Be our allies, be our friends. Let's grow our network. We obviously have an app coming out that we're super scared about, but actually it's the best way forward. I think there's the scare of the failure of what if it really does work? And it will work. And let's just hold on to that mantra. And given what Vanessa has said, a life without passion is a dull one indeed. So I'm wishing you all a great rest of your day and weekend wherever you are. Drop us a line if you need any help. Please follow Vanessa and WeAreTheCity and get involved. And apart from that, just have a great rest of your year, to be honest with you. We're halfway through. Thank you.
And thank you, Sonya.